The ballroom was suffocating in diamonds and champagne when Arthur Blackwood, the titan of finance, silenced the orchestra. He smiled, his eyes locked on a woman half his age, Serafina. He was about to propose live in front of the entire New York elite. But he forgot one crucial detail: his wife. He thought she was at home, defeated. He was wrong. As he dropped to one knee, the grand oak doors of the ballroom slammed open. It wasn't a guest. It was Eleanor, his wife, holding a stack of papers that would not just end their marriage, but dismantle his entire empire. The Grand Regent Hotel's Crystal Ballroom was a living constellation. Tonight was the annual Illuminate Gala, the flagship charity event for Blackwood Capital, and its CEO, Arthur Blackwood, was the sun around which every planet in New York's high society orbited. He was tall, with a predator's smile and silvering temples that photographers adored. He exuded a power that was almost liquid, a currency everyone in the room traded in. And on his arm, draped in a crimson backless gown that defied both gravity and decorum, was Serafina Hayes. She was 26, with eyes that held a calculated innocence and a resume that screamed meteoric. In 18 months, she had gone from the intern pool to vice president of acquisitions. The whispers followed them like a perfume. "Where is Eleanor?" a portly banking executive, Michael Sullivan, asked, clapping Arthur on the back. Arthur's smile didn't falter. "Eleanor. She's feeling under the weather. A pity. But she sends her love." He guided Serafina away, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Eleanor Vance had not been under the weather a single day in her life. She was the woman who had negotiated their first seed funding while in early labor with their son. She was the ghost in the machine of Blackwood Capital, the architect of the very foundation Arthur now stood upon. But tonight her absence was a strategic decision. At 9:15 p.m., Arthur tapped the side of his champagne flute with a silver knife. The music died. The chatter faded. A spotlight found him as he ascended the small stage. Friends, partners, family. He began, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "We gather tonight to illuminate the future. And as I look out at all of you, I realize that our future is nothing without truth. For too long, I have been living in the shadows of obligation. Tonight, I step into the light, into truth, into love." A collective silent gasp rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard charity speech. "Serafina," he said, holding out his hand. "Come up here." She acted surprised, a hand to her chest, the picture of overwhelmed beauty. She glided onto the stage. "Serafina Hayes." Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You have shown me what life can be. You are my future." He reached into his pocket. The room exploded in a flash of smartphone cameras. He dropped to one knee, revealing a blue velvet box. Inside a diamond glittered a truly obscene 12-carat canary yellow diamond. "Serafina, will you?" Boom! The two massive oak doors at the end of the ballroom slammed open, striking the marble walls with the force of a thunderclap. The entire gala turned. Framed in the doorway was Eleanor Vance. She was not in a ball gown. She was wearing a steel-grey, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked less like a scorned wife and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. Flanking her were two grim-faced men in dark suits. Arthur froze, one knee on the ground, the ring held aloft. Serafina's practiced smile melted into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. Eleanor walked. Her heels clicked on the marble floor with the steady, menacing rhythm of a clock ticking down. She didn't look at the whispering guests. Her eyes were fixed like lasers on the two figures on the stage. "I wouldn't accept that if I were you, Ms. Hayes." Eleanor's voice cut through the silence, clear and cold as ice. "It was purchased with funds, stolen from the employee pension fund." Arthur scrambled to his feet. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? You're embarrassing yourself." Eleanor stopped at the foot of the stage. She looked up not at her husband, but at the woman trying to replace her. "The ring is beautiful, Serafina, but it's evidence, as is the condo in Tribeca, and the McLaren 720S you registered in your mother's name." I don't know what you're talking about," Serafina stammered, backing away. "You will," Eleanor said. She then turned her gaze to her husband. The force of it seemed to physically push him back a step. "Arthur Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You are a thief, a fraud, and a fool." She nodded to one of the men behind her. He stepped forward and handed her a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Eleanor didn't hand it to Arthur. She tossed it onto the stage, where it landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "What is that?" Arthur spat, his face purple with rage. "That," Eleanor announced to the entire breathless room, "is a court-filed injunction freezing every asset you think you own, your bank accounts, your stocks, this company. It's all frozen. And these," she said, nodding to the second man, who stepped forward holding another set of documents, "are the divorce papers. You've been served, Arthur, publicly, just as you planned to humiliate me." The public execution at the gala was the end of a 6-month war nobody knew Eleanor was fighting. The first shot had been fired on a Tuesday in April, 6 months prior. It wasn't a lipstick stain. It wasn't a suspicious text. Arthur was sloppy, but not that sloppy. The clue was fittingly financial. Eleanor a Wharton, MBA, who had managed their family's complex portfolio for 2 decades, was reviewing their joint Amex statement. She ran their lives with the precision of a corporate audit. She noticed a charge from Bulgari for $28,000. It was coded as corporate gifting. She felt a cold prickle on her neck. Arthur was pathologically frugal with corporate gifts. He sent embossed pens and bottles of mid-range whiskey. He would never, ever approve a $28,000 gift without mentioning it. She checked the itemization: a serpenti diamond and emerald bracelet. Eleanor sat back in her leather chair in their silent, cavernous Upper East Side home. Their son William was away at Stanford. The house was just space and silence. And now this. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was for people who wanted a fight. Eleanor wanted information. That night she watched him. He came home late, smelling of expensive wine and a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers. He kissed her cheek, the gesture as dry and empty as a dead leaf. "Tough day, darling," he'd said, loosening his tie. "These new acquisitions are a killer." "Anything I can help with?" she asked, her voice perfectly level. No. It's all just, numbers." "You relax, you've earned it." He patted her on the shoulder, a gesture one might give a favored pet, and headed upstairs. "You relax," he had been saying that a lot. He who had built his career on her inheritance and her brain was now patting her on the head and telling her to relax. The next day, she didn't call a divorce lawyer. She called Julian Thorne. Julian was not the kind of private investigator you see in movies. He was a forensic accountant who had spent 15 years at the SEC before opening a discreet risk advisory firm. He specialized in finding financial and personal irregularities in high-net-worth individuals. He was precise, expensive, and utterly invisible. They met at a quiet cafe in the West Village, miles from her world. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. He was a small, neat man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Vance," she corrected him. It was her name. The one on her degree. The one on the trust accounts. "I suspect my husband is committing financial malfeasance against our shared interests. I also suspect he is having an affair. I believe the two are linked." She slid a file across the table. It contained the Amex statement, Arthur's schedule for the past 3 months, and a name. Serafina Hayes, VP of Acquisitions. Julian Thorne opened the file, glanced at the Bivalgari charge, and then at the name. He gave a small, dry sigh. "Ms. Vance, the affair, is almost always the appetizer. The main course is fraud. The young woman gets expensive. The husband starts to see his wife, the mother of his children, as a line-item expense, a problem to be managed, then a liability to be eliminated." "Eliminate me?" Eleanor said, her voice flat. "That's what he's doing. He's going to try and hide the money, Ms. Vance. He's going to create shell corporations, transfer assets, dilute your shares, and then he'll reluctantly ask for a divorce, claiming the business is struggling and offer you a generous but paltry settlement. He'll paint you as the out-of-touch wife who doesn't understand the pressure he's under." Eleanor felt a cold, hard anger settle in her stomach. It wasn't the passionate rage of a betrayed lover. It was the focused fury of a CEO whose partner was trying to gut the company. "Mr. Thorne," she said, leaning forward, "I don't want to catch him. I want to dismantle him. I want to know where every single penny he stole is. I want the account numbers, the transfer logs, the deeds. I want the how and the where. I already know the who and the why." Julian Thorne finally looked up, a glimmer of profound respect in his eyes. "This will be a full-spectrum audit. Financial, digital, and physical surveillance. Whatever it takes," Eleanor said, standing up. "My family's legacy is not a slush fund for my husband's midlife crisis." The first report from Julian Thorne arrived 2 weeks later, not in an email, but as a black encrypted hard drive delivered by a bonded courier. Eleanor plugged it into a new air-gapped laptop she'd bought for cash. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was worse than she imagined. The affair was blatant. Julian's team had been thorough. There were photos of Arthur and Serafina at a private villa in Lake Como, Italy, a trip he'd claimed was a solo strategic retreat. There were pictures of them dining at Per Se, laughing as Arthur fed Serafina a spoonful of caviar. But the affair was just the window dressing for the real crime. Julian's forensic team had cracked Arthur's private server. Arthur, in his arrogance, had used the same weak password for everything Master 1. Instance was a shadow ledger. Arthur wasn't just spending lavishly. He was systematically liquidating joint assets and transferring them to newly formed shell corporations. There was SH Holdings LLC in Delaware and Blackwood International, a Cayman Islands entity. SH Holdings, Serafina Hayes. He was moving millions. He had sold off a portfolio of blue-chip stocks that had been in Eleanor's family for generations. He had taken out a secret second mortgage on their Hamptons estate. And then Eleanor saw the organizational chart. It was a plan for a new company. This new entity, AS Global Arthur Serafina, was structured to acquire the best assets from Blackwood Capital for pennies on the dollar, leaving the original company and its shareholders, including Eleanor, holding nothing but debt. He wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to bankrupt her. And Serafina was no naive intern. She was an active participant. There were emails from her using a private Proton Mail account, advising Arthur on which assets had the most unlisted value and how to structure the offshore accounts to avoid SEC scrutiny. She was the one who had identified the employee pension fund as overfunded and poorly monitored, a perfect source for a short-term loan to fund their new life. The Bavulgari bracelet and the canary yellow diamond weren't gifts. They were payments. Eleanor closed the laptop, her breathing shallow. The man she had built a life with, the father of her child, was a common criminal. The humiliation of the affair was nothing compared to the profound glacial rage of this betrayal. He wasn't just cheating on a wife, he was robbing a partner. She walked to her study, a room Arthur never entered. Too many old books. He'd sniff and unlocked a hidden safe behind a 19th century landscape painting. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound document. The Vance Trust Agreement. Her father, Robert Vance, had been a shrewd, self-made man. When he died, he left Eleanor his entire fortune, but he'd placed her controlling interest in their future company, Blackwood Capital, inside this ironclad trust. She was the sole trustee. Arthur was the managing partner, but he never had controlling ownership. He couldn't sell the core assets of the company without her signature. Which meant... She scrolled through Julian's files again. Arthur hadn't sold the company's assets. He had sold their joint personal assets and leveraged company funds he had access to as CEO, the pension fund, the acquisitions budget. He was building his new empire with stolen money, all while believing her controlling shares would be worthless once he bankrupted the original company. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten about the Vance Trust. He had forgotten who she was. She picked up the phone. Her next call wasn't to Julian. It was to someone inside the company. Someone Arthur underestimated almost as much as he did her. "Marcus," she said, her voice pure steel. "This is Eleanor Vance. We need to talk. I believe you are being set up to be the fall guy for the largest corporate fraud in Blackwood Capital's history." Marcus Cole was the chief financial officer of Blackwood Capital. He was 63 years old, wore the same style of Brooks Brothers suit every day, and had been with the company since Eleanor's father had provided the seed money. Marcus was a man of ledger's rules and unwavering loyalty. And Arthur Blackwood was forcing him into early retirement. For the last 6 months, Marcus had been systematically frozen out. His reports were ignored. His access to key accounts was rerouted. His duties were being quietly transferred to the new dazzling VP of Acquisitions, Serafina Hayes. When Eleanor called, Marcus was in his office, packing his desk photos into a cardboard box. He agreed to meet her at a private club, one so old and dusty, it was off Arthur's glamour-obsessed radar. They sat in a dark panelled library that smelled of old leather and furniture polish. "Miss Vance," Marcus said, his face haggard. "It's good to see you, but I'm afraid I'm not much use to anyone. Arthur is making changes." "He's not making changes, Marcus," Eleanor said, placing a small encrypted thumb drive on the table between them. "He's gutting the company and planning to pin the collapse on you." Marcus frowned. "What are you talking about? He's just arrogant. He's reckless. He's not a—" "He is a criminal," Eleanor interrupted, "and so is his mistress." She told him everything. The shell corporations, the stolen joint assets, the plan to bankrupt Blackwood Capital, and finally the shadow ledger detailing the loan from the employee pension fund. As Marcus listened, his face went from skeptical to pale to a deep mottled red. The pension fund. Marcus had managed that fund for 30 years. It held the retirement savings of people he'd worked with his entire adult life. That child," Marcus whispered, his hands trembling. "Serafina Hayes. She requested the last 3 pension audits. She said she was looking for operational inefficiencies. I thought it was just MBA nonsense. It was a robbery, Marcus. And when the SEC investigates the multi-million-dollar hole, who do you think Arthur is going to blame? The new girlfriend he's flying to Como, or the long-standing CFO he's been systematically sidelining? Marcus Cole looked at Eleanor. The fog of his defeated retirement evaporated, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. "That monster," he said. "He's destroying your father's legacy. He's destroying our legacy." "Yes, he is," Eleanor said. "And that's where you come in. I have the external records. I have the personal surveillance. But I need the internal mechanics. I need the real server-side ledgers, the ones he thinks he's hidden from you. I need the original transfer authorizations he ordered you to sign, the ones Ms. Hayes countersigned for him. Can you get them?" Marcus leaned back, a grim smile playing on his lips for the first time in months. "Get them, Ms. Vance. I designed that system. I have a read-only backdoor key Arthur doesn't even know exists. I built it in case he ever got, well, in case of this." "Good," Eleanor said. "My legal team is being assembled. We have a PI gathering the personal data. You are the final piece of the puzzle, Marcus. You are the insider who will burn him to the ground from within." "He's been so busy trying to push me out the door," Marcus said, his eyes glinting. "He never stopped to think about what would happen if I turned around and locked it behind him." For the next 4 weeks, Marcus Cole became Eleanor's ghost. He fed her encrypted data packets every night. He unearthed the final damning piece of evidence Arthur hadn't just planned to steal from the pension fund. He'd already done it. He had authorized a capital transfer of $50 million to SH Holdings LLC, categorized as a seed investment in a new tech development. The countersignature wasn't Serafina's. It was a digital forgery of Marcus Cole's signature. Arthur had already signed his CFO's death warrant. Eleanor saved the file. This was the bullet for the gun. Now all she needed was the right moment to pull the trigger. Eleanor now had a mountain of evidence that was staggering in its scope. She had the PI's photos, the offshore bank records, the shadow ledger, and now, thanks to Marcus, the internal proof of a $50 million wire fraud. She brought it all to Camila Rodriguez. Camila was the most feared divorce and corporate litigation lawyer in New York. She didn't argue cases, she ended them. They met in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Central Park. Camila, dressed in a sharp magenta suit, reviewed the final file from Marcus, her face impassive. She read the forged signature, the wire transfer confirmation, and finally looked up at Eleanor. "Well," Camila said, closing the laptop, "this is no longer a divorce. This is a federal crime. Multiple, in fact. Wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Arthur's not going to a different apartment, Eleanor. He's going to prison." "What's the plan?" Eleanor asked. "The plan is a tactical strike," Camila said. "We don't file for divorce. Not yet. A divorce filing would alert him. He'd accelerate his transfers, destroy evidence, and flee. We go to the court ex parte, without him present. We present this evidence to a judge and request an emergency injunction, a temporary restraining order that freezes everything, every account, every property, every share. We freeze it all simultaneously. We'll time it with a complaint to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office." "He'll be cut off," Eleanor said. "He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee," Camila confirmed. "But the timing must be perfect. We need to serve him the moment the injunction is signed. We need him in a public place, away from his office, away from a shredder, away from a computer." Eleanor nodded slowly, and then a small, cold smile touched her lips. "I know just the place," she said. 2 days later, an invitation arrived at their home. It was embossed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. "Blackwood Capital cordially invites you to the Illuminate Gala at the Grand Regent Hotel." Eleanor looked at it. "He'll be there," she said to herself. "It's his favorite night. The one night he gets to play God in front of all his peers." That same day, Marcus sent her one last urgent message. He just ordered a 12-carat yellow diamond from Graff, had it messengered to the office. The invoice is staggering. He's going to do something. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. A ring. A gala. "He's going to propose," she whispered to the empty room. "He's going to propose to his mistress with my money at my event in front of my entire life." The sheer staggering arrogance of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to publicly replace and humiliate her, making her the pathetic, discarded wife in one grand public gesture. She immediately called Camilla. "The gala," Eleanor said, her voice shaking not with fear, but with a new, terrible resolve. "It's in 2 weeks. He's going to propose to her at the gala." There was a sharp intake of breath on Camilla's end. Wow, that's a new level of sociopath. "Forget serving him quietly," Eleanor said. "Forget a process server in the lobby. This changes the plan. He wants a public spectacle. He'll get one." "Eleanor, a public confrontation can be messy. It can backfire. It won't backfire if I'm the one holding all the cards," Eleanor stated. "I want your team ready. I want the injunction filed at 8:00 p.m. on the night of the gala. I want the process servers waiting in the lobby. And I want a copy of every single document bound in leather." "What are you going to do, Eleanor?" "He's giving a speech. He loves to give a speech. I'm going to let him. I'm going to let him get right to the climax. And then," Eleanor said, looking at her reflection in the dark window, "I'm going to walk in and deliver the punchline." For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor was a ghost. She told Arthur she was going to a wellness retreat in Arizona to clear her head. He'd been delighted, encouraging her to take all the time she needed. "You deserve it, darling." She wasn't in Arizona. She was in a war room at Camilla's law firm, rehearsing every possible scenario, memorizing every account number, and preparing for the final public execution of Arthur Blackwood. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking all the air and noise from the room. The only sound was the thud of the leather portfolio on the stage floor. Arthur Blackwood, still flushed from his romantic speech, stared at his wife. "Eleanor," he seethed, "you are drunk. Security, get her out of here." "They can't," Eleanor said, her voice amplified by the quiet. "Because they don't work for you." As of 9:17 p.m., she pointedly checked the Cartier watch he had given her for their 20th anniversary. "By emergency order of the State Superior Court, all of Mr. Blackwood's personal and professional assets are frozen." A new wave of gasps. This was better than theatre. "And," Eleanor continued, taking a step closer to the stage, "as the majority shareholder of Blackwood Capital, I'm placing you on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full criminal investigation." "Majority shareholder?" Arthur laughed, a high, panicked sound. "You're delusional. I am Blackwood Capital." "You've always been confused about that, Arthur," Eleanor said. She turned, addressing not him, but the board members and investors seated at the front tables. Michael Sullivan, the banker from earlier, looked like he'd swallowed his fork. Many of you know my father, Robert Vance. When he provided the seed money to found this company, he placed my 51% controlling interest in an ironclad trust. A trust I am the sole trustee of. She turned back to Arthur, whose face had gone a sickly pale white. He knew. He knew she was right. You couldn't touch my shares, Arthur. So you decided to bankrupt the company they were attached to. You decided to steal. You thought I was too busy with charity auctions and garden parties to notice. She looked at Serafina, who was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. You, Miss Hayes, you were his partner. S.H. Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware. Does that ring a bell? I loved him, Serafina cried out. You loved the $50 million he wired to your shell company, Eleanor snapped. The $50 million he stole directly from the Blackwood Capital Employee Pension Fund, the fund that holds the retirement of your own colleagues. The room erupted. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a betrayal of everyone. That's a lie, Arthur roared, finally finding his voice. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife. She's a vindictive, scorned woman. She's lying. Am I? Eleanor asked. She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up. This is the wire transfer authorization from Blackwood Capital to S.H. Holdings. And this, she said, tapping the bottom, is the signature. Arthur tried to get clever. He didn't forge his own name. He forged the name of his CFO, Marcus Cole. At the back of the ballroom, another figure stepped out of the shadows. Marcus Cole, looking 10 years younger, walked forward. And Mr. Cole, Eleanor said, is standing right there, prepared to testify that he has never seen nor authorized this transfer. Arthur looked from Eleanor to Marcus. The trap was complete. He was surrounded. This is, he stammered. This is a misunderstanding, a corporate dispute. This is a private matter. You made it public when you got down on one knee, Eleanor said. You wanted to propose to your mistress. You wanted to give her a ring. Please, Arthur, give her the ring. Arthur looked at the yellow diamond ring in his hand, as if seeing it for the first time. It felt like a hot coal. Give it to her, Eleanor commanded. Or shall I? It's Exhibit A in the SEC's case against you both. The purchase was made from a joint account I personally froze an hour ago. The check is going to bounce. Serafina let out a small, animalistic whimper. She looked at the ring, then at Arthur. The love in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian terror. She scrambled off the stage and, holding her crimson dress, sprinted out of the ballroom. Arthur Blackwood was alone on the stage, the spotlight still on him, the ring still in his hand. Eleanor walked up the steps. She stood in front of him close enough to smell the sweat and the expensive wine on his breath. He was shaking. It's over, Arthur, she whispered for his ears only. You bitch, he hissed, his face a mask of hate. You ruined me. Eleanor leaned in. You ruined yourself. I just turned on the lights. She turned back to the crowd, her composure perfect. My apologies for the interruption. Please enjoy the dessert. Blackwood Capital, rather Vance Capital, will be in touch tomorrow with a full statement. Good night. She walked off the stage, past the process servers, now handing the divorce papers to her stunned, broken husband, and didn't look back once. The gala was the public execution, but the marriage had been dead for a decade. The true story wasn't just about Arthur's recent crimes. It was about a 20-year resentment that had finally boiled over. Eleanor Vance and Arthur Blackwood met at Wharton. She was the quiet, brilliant daughter of a self-made investor. He was the scholarship kid with ferocious ambition and a charisma that could charm a snake. When Eleanor's father, Robert Vance, passed away, he left her his enter fortune. But he'd seen the hunger in Arthur. He didn't trust it. His will was his final act of protection. "Your shares in the company we're building," he'd told Eleanor on his deathbed, "are in the Vance Trust. You are the trustee. Arthur can be the CEO, the face the rainmaker. He can make you both richer than God. But he can never own the majority. He can manage your money, Eleanor, but he can never control your power. Don't you ever dissolve this trust." For 20 years, Arthur had tried. In the beginning, it was cajoling. "Darling, it's just a formality. It would make our tax situation so much simpler if we merged our assets." In the middle years, it was frustration. "It's insulting, Eleanor. It's as if you don't trust me. We're married. We're partners." In the last 5 years, it was cold, barely concealed rage. "That damn trust. It's a relic. It's holding me back. It's holding the company back." What he meant was it was holding him back from cashing her out. Eleanor had always held firm, not because she suspected him, but out of loyalty to her father's wishes. "It's for William's future, Arthur. It's protected." Arthur's resentment of the Vance Trust, of her name, of her unassailable 51% power, was the cancer at the heart of their marriage. He felt like the help, a brilliantly paid manager for his wife's family money. He wanted something that was his. Serafina Hayes was his opportunity. She didn't just stroke his ego. She stroked his resentment. She validated his belief that Eleanor was an anchor. "She's old money, Arthur," Serafina had whispered to him in that Lake Como villa. A whisper Julian Thorne's audio bug had picked up. "She doesn't get it. You're the genius. You built this. We can build something new. Something that's just ours. You just have to be brave enough to take what you're owed." So he'd started to steal. He began with their joint accounts, which Eleanor had foolishly let him manage. He moved on to leveraging company assets. He could control the operational budgets, the capital expenditure accounts. And his final fatal mistake was the pension fund. He saw it as a $50 million piggy bank. He, with Serafina's guidance, believed he could borrow it, build his new empire, and then pay it back before the next audit. He never in a million years believed that Eleanor, his quiet, out-of-touch wife, would be the one to conduct the audit herself. He had forgotten who she was. He forgot she had the same blood as Robert Vance. He forgot that she was the one who had written the original company bylaws, the very bylaws that gave the majority shareholder, in the event of proven CEO malfeasance, the right to immediately assume control. The assets Eleanor walked in with weren't just the divorce papers. They were the original Vance Trust agreement, the proxy votes from Marcus Cole and 2 other board members Marcus had flipped, and the court-stamped injunction. She didn't just walk in with proof of his cheating. She walked in as his new boss, just long enough to fire him before becoming the sole owner of the ruins. The dawn of November 5th felt less like a new day and more like a global detonation. The financial world was on fire. Phones rang off the hook, trading desks buzzed, and every major news outlet led with the story. The Wall Street Journal was brutal and precise. Blackwood's Black Heart, CEO, ousted at own gala amid 50 anonymous fraud allegations. The New York Post, in its typical fashion, was even more visceral, with a full-page photo of Serafina fleeing the ballroom. The headline, "Proposal Interruptus Mistress Flees Wife, Freezes 'em Out." Arthur Blackwood had spent the night in a 12-by-8-foot holding cell, a stunning fall from his 12,000-square-foot penthouse. When he was finally released on a $10 million bond, a sum he had no way of paying, he was met with the first true taste of his new reality. He tried to use his Blackwood Capital corporate card to pay the taxi that had waited for him. Declined. He tried his personal Amex. Declined. His assets were so thoroughly and immediately frozen that he was in an instant a pariah. He was a billionaire with less cash in his pocket than the hot dog vendor on the corner. He had to borrow $100 from his own lawyer just to get back to an apartment that was no longer his. Serafina Hayes was in worse shape. She wasn't just a jilted mistress. She was a named co-conspirator. A lien had been placed on her Tribeca condo. The McLaren was seized from her mother's garage, and her personal bank accounts, swollen with Arthur's stolen cash, were frozen as proceeds of crime. She was trapped with no money, no allies, and a federal indictment on her doorstep. At 9:00 a.m., sharp Eleanor Vance walked into the 40th floor boardroom of what was for a few more hours Blackwood Capital. The mood she entered was one of pure, unadulterated panic. The remaining board members, a collection of grey-faced men and women who had rubber-stamped Arthur's decisions for a decade, were already assembled. They had been there since 7:00 a.m., huddled in fear, their BlackBerries and iPhones vibrating off the polished mahogany table. They weren't just worried about the company. They were worried about their own liability. They were wondering if their names were in the SEC complaint. When Eleanor entered, the chatter stopped. She was flanked by Camila Rodriguez, who carried a stack of new legal binders, and Marcus Cole, who looked not like a man packing his desk, but like a general retaking a hill. Eleanor was wearing a simple, powerful navy blue dress. She looked rested, calm, and utterly in control. She walked to the head of the table, Arthur's seat, and placed her portfolio down. She did not sit. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the stale, fearful air. James Patterson, the longest-serving board member, cleared his throat. "Eleanor, my God, this is a catastrophe. A complete... We need a plan. We need to hire a crisis team, find an interim CEO, perhaps someone from outside to..." "That won't be necessary," Eleanor said. "Now, Eleanor, with all due respect," Patterson pushed, "this is a multi-billion-dollar crisis. We need a seasoned hand at the wheel, we need a plan to sell the company for parts now before the DOJ tears it apart." Eleanor fixed him with a look so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "Mr. Patterson, I was the first analyst this company ever had. I negotiated our first line of credit while Arthur was still learning to tie a Windsor knot. I was hedging our currency exposure while you were approving his expense reports. The seasoned hand you're looking for, the one that should have been at the wheel, is the one that just saved this company from the seasoned hand you all rubber-stamped for the last 5 years." Patterson's mouth snapped shut. "I am, as of last night's emergency proxy vote," she nodded to Marcus, "assuming the role of acting CEO. This is not a discussion. These are the next steps." She laid them out with the precision of a surgeon. "First, we are not fighting the SEC or the U.S. Attorney. We are welcoming them. We will be transparent, immediate, and fully cooperative. Marcus will oversee a full internal audit to assist them. We are purging the rot, not hiding it. Second," she continued, "we are filing civil suits against both Arthur Blackwood and Serafina Hayes to reclaim every cent of the $50 million. However, our employees will not wait for that. The pension fund will be made whole effective today." Another board member, a woman named Sarah, looked confused. Made whole with what the company's assets are frozen. They are, Eleanor agreed, which is why I am making the fund whole from my personal assets. The Vance Trust will cover the $50 million loss effective at noon. Our employees' retirement is secure. It is not and never will be negotiable. The room inhaled as one. This wasn't just a corporate move. It was a statement of absolute power and integrity. She wasn't just saving the company. She was personally guaranteeing it. It shut down every argument about solvency and leadership in one move. Third, she said, Blackwood Capital is dead. The brand is toxic, and frankly, it's a lie. We will be restructuring and rebranding. As of today, we are Vance Coal Investments, a name that reflects the real partners in this firm. She looked at Marcus, who nodded grimly. The new era had begun. That afternoon, as Eleanor was signing the authorization to transfer her own $50 million, Camila Rodriguez entered her new office, Arthur's old office, and shut the door. "You're not going to believe this," Camila said, a note of weary disgust in her voice. "I just got a call from Serafina Hayes's new lawyer. She's playing her last card." Eleanor looked up from the desk. "Which one?" "The oldest one in the book," Camila said. "Ms. Hayes is in a delicate condition. She is claiming she is pregnant with Arthur Blackwood's child. She is prepared to fight for her and her unborn child's rightful claim to the Blackwood estate." Eleanor was silent for a full 10 seconds. She didn't look angry. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. "It's a lie," Eleanor said simply. "You don't know that," Camila cautioned. "It complicates the asset seizure if she's—" "Oh, yes, I do," Eleanor replied, a cold finality in her voice. "Because Julian Thorne's report was very, very thorough. He didn't just get financial records. He got medical ones. Serafina Hayes has been on high-dose birth control prescribed and picked up from a pharmacy in Chelsea every month for the last 2 years. She's not pregnant. She's just desperate." Camila stared, then let out a low whistle. "You are terrifying. I love it. What are your instructions?" Eleanor leaned back in her new chair. "Call him back. Tell him we will happily, enthusiastically pay for a court-ordered blood test from a doctor of our choosing. And while you have him, remind him that perjury filing a false claim and attempting to leverage a non-existent pregnancy in a federal fraud case might add a few more charges to Ms. Hayes's indictment. Obstruction of justice, perhaps. Let's see how brave she feels then." Camila grinned. "Consider it done." The pregnancy claim was formally and permanently withdrawn an hour later. The 6 months that followed the gala were not a celebration. They were a war fought on 2 fronts. In the boardroom, Eleanor, with Marcus Cole as her unwavering president, waged a campaign of stabilization. She was ruthless in her efficiency. She slashed Arthur's vanity projects personally, called every major investor to restore confidence, and rebranded the entire firm. Vance Coal Investments rose from the ashes of Blackwood Capital leaner, more transparent, and to the shock of Wall Street, more profitable. She wasn't just a placeholder. She was a natural leader, finally uncaged. The second front was the courtroom. The divorce and the criminal trials were set on parallel high-speed tracks. Serafina Hayes was the first to break. The image of the glittering seductress was gone, replaced by a terrified young woman in an ill-fitting suit, her high-priced lawyers long gone, replaced by a stressed public defender. The 12-carat diamond had been seized. Her condo was in foreclosure, and the reality of a federal indictment was a cold, hard wall. She couldn't charm her way through. Faced with a decade in prison as Arthur's co-conspirator, she took the only deal Camila Rodriguez and the U.S. Attorney's Office offered. She would plead guilty. Turn over every text, every secret email, every damning voice memo she had of Arthur, and testify against him. In exchange for substantial cooperation, she would get a reduced sentence. Her testimony was a masterpiece of self-preservation. She wept painting Arthur as a manipulative monster who had preyed on her ambition, who had promised her the world while framing her for his crimes. She admitted to her role in identifying the pension fund, but claimed she thought it was a legal short-term investment strategy. No one believed her, but it didn't matter. Her evidence was the nail in Arthur's coffin. She was sentenced to 2 years in a minimum security federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and a restitution order for $50 million, a sum she would never be able to repay. Then came Arthur's turn. His legal team was aggressive, attempting to muddy the waters. First, in the divorce hearing, his lawyer argued that the marriage was a 20-year partnership and that the Vance Trust was a legal fiction designed to defraud a working spouse of his rightful share. He painted Eleanor as a cold, do-nothing aristocrat. Camila Rodriguez let him speak for nearly an hour. Then she stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood's counsel is eloquent," she said, "but he seems to have forgotten 2 key documents." She produced the Vance Trust, its language as ironclad as Robert Vance had intended, and then she produced the prenuptial agreement. "This prenup," Camila said, "was drafted in 1999. It was not drafted by my client. It was drafted and insisted upon by Mr. Arthur Blackwood himself." A murmur went through the court. Arthur at the defense table went rigid. Camila continued. Mr. Blackwood at the time believed he would be the billionaire and wanted to protect his future assets from his wife. I'd like to read Clause 12b, which he personally initialed all assets held in premarital trusts, including but not limited to the Vance Trust, shall remain the sole and separate property of the designated beneficiary, regardless of the marriage's duration. The judge looked over his glasses at Arthur's lawyer. "Are you arguing against your own client's legal draft?" The divorce was finalized in less than 10 minutes. Arthur Blackwood was awarded his personal effects and 2 paintings he'd purchased with a non-joint credit card. He walked out of that hearing with nothing but the suit he was wearing. His criminal trial was even faster. The combination of Serafina's tearful, detailed testimony and Marcus Cole's calm, precise ledgers was devastating. The prosecution laid out the case, the forged signature, the wire transfer, the shell company, the motive. The jury deliberated for exactly 45 minutes. When they returned, Eleanor was sitting in the back row. She had not attended the rest of the trial, but she would be there for the end. On the charge of wire fraud, how do you find guilty? On the charge of embezzlement from an employee pension fund, how do you find guilty? On the charge of conspiracy, how do you find all guilty? With every guilty. Arthur seemed to shrink. He didn't roar or protest. He made a small, choked sound, like a balloon deflating, and sagged in his chair. At the sentencing hearing a week later, he tried one last performance. He stood his expensive suit now looking 2 sizes too big, his hair lackluster. "Your Honor," he said, his voice hoarse. "I am a builder. I built an empire. I made one mistake. A mistake of the heart. I fell in love and I lost my way. But I am not a criminal." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Helen Shaw, stared at him, her face impassive. When he finished, she took off her glasses. "Mr. Blackwood, you are not a builder. You are a taker. You took your wife's inheritance and called it your own. You took her trust and called it an insult. You took your employees' retirement money to buy diamonds for your mistress. You are a man of profound, staggering arrogance and zero character. You didn't make a mistake of the heart. You committed a calculated multi-million-dollar fraud against everyone who ever trusted you." She put her glasses back on. "You are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison." The gavel cracked. "All rise." Eleanor watched as two marshals came forward, told Arthur to put his hands behind his back, and fastened the handcuffs. She watched him be led away, his face a grey mask of defeat. She felt quiet. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't sadness for the man she had once loved. That man had been a ghost for a decade. It wasn't even pity. It was just the end of the noise. The end of the 20-year-long fight. The end of the lies. The end of the resentment. It was an audit. A final line item closed and balanced. She stood and walked out of the courtroom alone into the blinding flash of cameras on the courthouse steps. A wolf pack of reporters surged forward. "Ms. Vance, Ms. Vance, how does it feel? Are you selling the company, Eleanor? What do you have to say to Arthur Blackwood?" The old Eleanor would have hidden, fled to a car. The new Eleanor stopped. She stood at the top of the steps, poised and untouchable. "Vance Coal Investments," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the din. "Just posted its best quarter in 5 years. We are not selling. We are hiring." She gave them a small, genuine smile. The first one in years. "The future is bright." She walked down the steps, the reporters parting for her. A new, sleek silver Bentley, one she had bought herself, pulled up to the curb. The driver held the door open. Her son William, who had flown in for the sentencing, was waiting inside. He took her hand, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. "You did it, Mum," he whispered. Eleanor Vance got in the car. She didn't look back at the courthouse, at the circus she was leaving behind, or at the man who was now just a number in a federal system. The car pulled silently into traffic, and she drove away to her new life. A life that was finally and completely her own. And so Eleanor Vance proved that the most dangerous person is the one everyone underestimates. She didn't just get mad, she got everything. Arthur built his house of cards on her foundation, and he forgot she still owned the land. This story is a powerful reminder. Know your worth, know your business, and never, ever let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate revenge? Was it too cold, or was it perfectly calculated justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama karma and a woman taking back her power, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas every single week. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the fallout. Thanks for listening.